This is a poem about emigration, and particularly the Irish emigrant experience and mine personally. And it looks at the question of now and then and nostalgia, is particularly keen for any emigrant. It's called The Dream of Decades. Sleeping the sleep of the emigrant, sitting by the fire in the old house, my father waiting for me at the North Wall ferryport, going to the bars to see ex-lovers and friends, hearing the latest news and banter in the warm glow of recognition. Dinner in the little railway cottages that line the North Strand. My mother still a distant presence who my brothers talk of, like a banshee who occasionally cries in the night. How all have cars and cash, and why would anyone stay in London when Ireland is Tirnan Oak? The old haunts not yet demolished with familiar ways and byways. The crack in the pubs where every second person writes a novel or recites a poem, and the spirit of Joyce and Behan still walk long before stags and hens laid waste the land. The rude awakening to the tortuous light of now, the grating voices and the arrogant swagger of business suits. No one waits at arrivals, and the sign to departures is always clear. The past is a foreign country and dispatched to YouTube and photographic exhibitions where those like me may reminisce. The pubs are full of young strangers, and no one knows what happened to those who have fallen through the vortex of passing time. It is no country for old men, and families have grown and come and gone, the ghostly presence of a long-gone relative, an occasional reminder of when youth and spring seemed all there was. Now and then a familiar face emerges from the fog of time, a memory of what has been and gone, joining the tourist throngs and seeing the city through tourist eyes. Fionn stands on the cliffs and gazes on a new-made world. Some years ago, after reading the biography of the Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh, I went on a literary pilgrimage to Inishkeen, the village where he lived, and also visited the local town of Carrickmacross, where Kavanagh had, let us say, a rather colourful reputation. On the main street of Carrickmacross, the pubs have plaques on Kavanagh, eloquent lines on places visited, but not from where he was barred and hunted out. A young man says he was a terrible man. Returned emigrant from Canada from local stock, no link with the cloying soil, nor sympathy for the peasant poet. The old man remembers the drunken poet, drinking in the station bar between platforms with the Dublin train. Worked long years on the railways, when trains still chugged through Inishkeen. If ever you go to Inishkeen in 100 years or so, swallows fly over Niallow's pub, and black and white photos of her famous son grace the walls. Black hills, grey clouds, and the poet's grave. The Poet's Rest tea shop closes at 4. Tourists must go thirsty, as Kavanagh did, thirsting for love and recognition, cadging cigarettes and drinks in Dublin pubs. The last 7 years, Ireland has had a series of centenaries about various historical events, and one was in 2016, celebrating the centenary of the 1916 Rising. And after having gone on a walking tour about the Rising in Dublin, I heard this interesting story about how one of the leading figures from the rebellion was actually written out of the history. On a 1916 tour of Dublin, hearing how Elizabeth Farrell surrendering to the British has her image removed from the photo with Patrick Pearse. But clumsy editing means her boots are still visible in the photo. No Photoshop in 1916, but editing now and then was deep in vogue. Casement's pink gayness photoshopped from the official narrative for 90 years. The Black Diaries, an insult and rebuke to the new Catholic and Apostolic state. Casement was gay, I shouted in a West Belfast Republican pub in the 80s. My gay English friend trying to bundle me out the door before I too was photoshopped. Markovich and the women who were more than friends in Common Amon, photoshopped and their stories sent to the dusty files of the National Library. The Magdalen laundries and mother and child homes with their mass graves, photoshopped from the collective memories of generations weaned on gay burn and the Irish mammy and a nun offering you a sweet at school if you were good. Connolly and his message photoshopped to an image of a helpless cripple in a chair, facing a firing squad, another stoic martyred verse in the heroic hymn of nationhood. 1966 and the marching troops along O'Connell Street, with snotty children gaping there dressed in short trousers, with Grand Uncle De Valera giving out the presents. An 18-year-old in Toner's pub, hearing Dev was dead, and the clink of glasses as some praised the great man and others damned him to hell. His portraits everywhere, his presence tangible, as father figure of a dull and Philistine state. Photoshopped, his pictures now downgraded, in a new version of history where Collins is the hero. And gay friends driven to drink, despair, and suicide. Ex-priests and others damaged beyond repair. A referendum passed and a new dawn. A Photoshop where only footprints show they once were. I recently read this poem at the COVID memorial wall opposite Westminster for an event for International Workers' Memorial Day, organised by the trade unions and some of the bereaved families. And I've tried to incorporate into this poem my feelings about the pandemic, which I believe is far from over. COVID, in memoriam. Along the dark waters of the Thames stands the memorial. Long it stretches along the wall bordering the hospital, where many it commemorates spent last hours, alone, terrified, struggling for life with every breath. Thousands of hearts adorn its surface, some once bright red, now a pale shade of pink. Others gone so faint, like memories of the lives spent in safer times. Names given meaning by messages of love. A dear father taken too soon, missed by all. Taken by a visit to the shop, a drink in the pub, a chat in the neighbour's house, a queue in the post office. Everyday acts, innocent before, now poisoned with death's sharp arrow. Nurses, bus drivers, shop assistants laboured through the lockdowns, could not escape the locking down of life, of breath. On the opposite bank of the Styx sits the Grand Palace, site of endless talk and lies, whose masters watched indifferent as wretches struggled, gasping desperately for air, clutching at the straw. For them, the dollar and the pound, the sandwich shops, the heaving pubs, the cut and thrust of commerce and commute, the centre of a universe of Moloch, which suffering and loss do not touch, nor tears nor entreaties move from its predetermined axis. The grave stands silent, the mourner's gone. Accusingly, the monument stares across, waiting the moment of truth, when accounts will be settled and murderers' names writ large in blood upon its tragic surface. And now I'm going to introduce two poems which I wrote in the last couple of years, both about Ireland. One is called The Bog, about a bog which I visited in County Longford in the centre of Ireland, which was used for the exploitation of peat, but not any longer. And the second poem, called The Crosley Tinder, is about the series of centenaries in Ireland. This was about the Irish War of Independence and the famous Black and Tans, or a paramilitary British force unleashed on the Irish people during the Irish War of Independence.
The bog. Grey clouds scudding across a Longford sky. I cycle along the Royal Canal. Lockkeepers' cottages built before the famine, when this was the watery highway bearing starving peasants to the emigrant ships at anchor in Dublin. A narrow-gauge railway leads into the bog, another historic route overtaken by time and history. Used to carry peat from the bog for Bord na Móna, the Irish turf board, for burning in power stations and open fires and fertilizing gardens. The bog stands before me in the rain, justifying its original meaning in the Irish language. Bog, soft. And springy underfoot, much of the peat now scooped up, leaving brown waste ground. But beauty blooms here too, with the bog cotton. Its wavy white flowers carpet the surface, down to the deep pools, some as large as small lakes. A desiccated tree branch, survivor of the great pine forest that once covered vast tracts of Ireland. The heather, with its glowing colours softened by the rain, covers much of the railway embankment now. Nature returns to claim the land that man has scarred. The vista is profound, a wide wilderness of water plants and butterflies. This brown land now valued as it never was before, when my family burned turf briquettes in our fireplace, and the rich smell of burning turf fires was the incense of an Irish village. Recognised as habitat and carbon sink, beloved of climate warriors and scientists alike, it takes its place with jungles and seas, a brown cornucopia, an Irish Cinderella.
The Crossley Tender, 1920. They're nice and strong, made by Crossley Motors in Manchester. Royal Flying Corps been using them during the war. They're sturdy and strong, good for getting through the mud. Now they're used by our boys in Ireland for getting through the bogs, hunting down those Irish terrorists and thugs. Black and tans, they call our boys, 'cause there ain't no proper uniform. Police black and army tan, got to use what you can get. Tommy Turner's one, and gets paid a good whack, straight back from the trenches, and the dole beckoned, so reckoned he'd head over and sort out the Irish. Plenty of beer, they said, and the run of the land. No controls, and martial law lets you do as you wants. Sitting atop a Crossley Tender, roaring down the country roads of Cork and Kerry, Kenmare, Skibbereen, Dingle and Cahersabeen, you can be king of all you survey and feel the Atlantic breeze in your hair. But the barracks is the only place you feel safe, though you've got a Maxim gun. The towns are rebel hotbeds and nobody's safe, which is why you got to burn them down. Our mail is delivered by aeroplane as the post's not safe, getting pissed on Guinness and firing off rounds in the square. If some bastard Paddy gets hit, then we add him to the list. King's service, and it's a free pass for our lads. But they wear us down, and Sergeant Buller copped it last week. Ambush on the Kilmichael Road, 17 dead. The Crossley Tender roars along the country lanes, but you're a sitting duck when the IRA is behind every ditch and rock, that fucking Michael Collins and his gang. Never told us it would be like this, and us wanting a land fit for heroes, lying in an Irish ditch with a bullet through the head. For king and empire, past the sick bag. If we make it back to Bitey, I will count my blessings and never see this land of bogs and constant rain again. One-way ticket, and they can keep their bloody whiskey and shebeens. Heard there might be jobs in Palestine and Mesopotamia. Weather's better and the natives not as mad.